This is the Spark Core. I received it over a year ago, but I never did anything with it at the time. I'm now kind of taking another look at it and see what its capabilities or what it's like to use. It's a small kind of Arduino style development environment, but it's got a Wi-Fi module on the back. It's the CC3000. This was really popular a few years back. Well, it's kind of slightly dropping out of favour nowadays, but it was kind of very representative of the era, which was about a year or two ago. It was developed and released. So this is the Spark Core. You can see on the top you've got the CC3000 Wi-Fi module, and on the end here you've got the chip kind of antenna. There's two buttons, one for kind of mode and kind of master reprogramming, and then a typical reset button. And there's an RGB LED in there for status information. And on the reverse is the kind of the ARM processor, a bit of flash memory, voltage regulator, and other little bits and pieces to make it function. On the side there's a dozen or so kind of inputs, digital inputs and outputs. There's two kind of serial connections in here as well, and in addition to the serial via the USB, which is fantastic for talking to other devices, and it kind of really helps debugging. It runs at 3.3 volts, which, depending on what you're doing, may or may not be a good thing. But yeah, so this is the current version. This is the Spark Core. They do currently have a Photon, which is in production / about to go into production. I've got a couple of them on order, or kind of pre-ordered, and it's basically the modern version of this. This is a year and a half, 2 years old, and the new version kind of reduces it down in size a little bit, I believe, and I think it adds kind of memory and RAM to the mix, and just generally improves it all around. So even the Wi-Fi chipset in here is at least 2 years old. For me, the real appeal of something like this is the internet connection baked in. The fact that you can kind of get online in it's natively what it does. The fact that it's built in means it's going to do it well, or theoretically it should do it well. And I think for most of the stuff I'm doing nowadays, the internet connection is a vital part of it, or at least it's a very useful part of it. So this is the current project I'm working with. Really straightforward setup, just two peripherals, RFID reader in there, and an OLED screen. And I just happen to be using an interesting screen on here. It's a single colour, but it's two colours. The top, I think, 15 rows are yellow, whereas the rest is a nice kind of bluey colour. And so it works really well for kind of status information. So running along the top, I've got connected status, signal strength status, and just a bit of text, and the main text on the screen. So that's quite a nice touch. But like I say, it's a quite straightforward project, but what I quite like about a Spark Core is that it has different modes of operation. You've got the ability to connect straight to the cloud, and it's blocking until that happens. Although I'm running in kind of semi-autonomous mode at the moment, so on boot up, my code runs first, and so I can display a message to the screen, just saying kind of a holding message. Then it tries to connect, and you've got the status about the cloud connection and Wi-Fi connection, so you can kind of feed that back to the user. So I don't know how legible this is going to be, but you've got online in the top corner there. So if I reboot it, I've got starting, Wi-Fi connecting, and then finally connected. Flashing green is the Wi-Fi connecting status. So you've got the ability to kind of really feed back kind of all the information you need to the user. The Spark Core has a handful of kind of inbuilt methods for communicating with the outside world. Now, one of them is the ability for an external user, a server perhaps, a web browser, to connect to the core and just fetch a status of a variable. It could be a pin or anything like that, so it could be useful for connecting to it and reading the status back of something. It's quite nice. And then there's the ability to send it message or initiate something, so it could be starting off an action, which again is pretty good. Certainly with the WebSocket connection, it's potentially very fast, so you can use it to initiate something. The ability for the Spark Core to talk out, though, is, I think, in my opinion, where it's really lacking. They've got the ability to post a message, broadcast a message. Now that is, you can wrap kind of data up in the kind of body of that message, but it's this idea of perhaps broadcasting sensor data or kind of status information that kind of goes out, and whoever's listening can receive that. So you can subscribe to it from a webhook or even from another core. But the feature they're testing at the moment, which I'm working with for this project, is the webhook. So you can tie one of those broadcast messages in to ping a website or URL you specify. So in my case, when an RFID tag is scanned, it takes that number and it broadcasts it. The webhook is then running on their system, and it picks up that broadcast message, and it sends it or relays it on to my web server. That then performs the lookup based on that kind of payload data of the RFID tag ID, and rather than immediately responding, which I can't get to work in a very reliable way, I don't think it's been thought out particularly well, it sends its own message back. It uses the feature to talk directly to the core. So independent of the incoming message, it sends a message back to here saying, here's the information for the RFID read. Obviously, if a lot of messages were going back and forth at the same time, that would all get confused and cluttered, and you'd need other ways of tracking it. But for my purpose, it works well, and it's proved to be pretty reliable so far. The next step for this project is to box it all up. Now, I'm thinking of using the existing kind of panel I built, or box system for the main kind of access control system. It goes with it. The front panel has the same information. It's got an RFID reader and an OLED screen, so I think that will translate perfectly. The bit I'll probably redesign is the rear enclosure. It doesn't need to be as deep, because there's no real connectors. It's going to be crude, it's a one-off thing, and so I'll drop that back, probably change the kind of support structure in here a little bit to make it fit, but I think if possible I'll try and stick with the same front panel. And I should be able to bring this project to a close and ideally monitor kind of the performance and the status of it over time, see how reliable and how useful it is, especially within the kind of build Brighton environment where the internet connection is just bizarre and slightly crappy at times. But yeah, it's the idea of getting it in place as soon as possible to see how it's going to function.